The cellar door creaked the way it always did, slow and heavy, like it was warning anyone nearby that whatever was down there wasn't meant to be messed with. That sound mattered later, but at the time I didn't know it would. I just knew the root cellar had been on my property long before the HOA ever existed, an old-school setup dug into the ground decades ago, lined with stone and warped wood, used for storage and absolutely not shared space. It sat behind my house with a clear boundary line, a private access door, and enough obvious signs that any normal person would understand it wasn't public, communal, or up for grabs. Karen was not a normal person. It started with questions, the kind she always asked when she wanted something she didn't own. "What's that little door for?" she asked one afternoon, squinting toward the cellar like she'd stumbled onto buried treasure. I told her straight up it was a root cellar. Private. End of discussion. She nodded slowly, lips tightening, and said, "Interesting." That word always set off alarms. Whenever Karen said interesting, it meant she was already drafting fake HOA rules in her head. Over the next week she kept circling back. She called it unused space, even after I told her I stored tools, canned food, and seasonal gear down there. She suggested it could be shared community storage. She joked about turning it into an HOA archive. Every comment came wrapped in fake friendliness, but the entitlement was loud and clear. I shut it down every time. "It's private property," I said. "Not HOA. Not shared." She smiled like she hadn't heard a single word. Then the hints turned into assumptions. One morning she casually said, "I'll need access soon." I laughed, honestly thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She tapped her clipboard and said, "Unused areas fall under review." I told her clearly she was not allowed anywhere near it. She rolled her eyes and said, "We'll see," like this was some kind of power contest she expected to win. 2 days later, I heard raised voices outside and looked out the window. Karen was standing by the cellar door, clipboard out, talking to a neighbor like she was giving a guided tour. "This space could be repurposed," she said confidently, gesturing like a realtor. I stepped outside and told her to leave my property. She waved me off and said, "I just need to check something," already reaching for the handle. Before I could stop her, she pulled the door open. The hinge screamed loud and sharp. She started stepping down like she owned the place, muttering about HOA inventory, safety inspections, and liability. I told her to stop. She didn't. She went down another step, then another. That's when it clicked. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. She was trespassing on purpose. I didn't touch her. I didn't shove her. I didn't yell. I walked forward calmly, closed the door, and let it drop shut with a solid thud. I locked it. From below, she started screaming instantly. "Open this door," she yelled. "This is HOA property." Her voice echoed up from underground, frantic and angry. I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and called the police, explaining exactly what happened in plain terms. Trespasser entered my cellar after being told not to. Door closed. No one hurt. Neighbors came out fast. Phones appeared like clockwork. Karen rattled the door, yelling about authority, violations, lawsuits, and nonsense. Someone whispered, "Is she serious?" Another neighbor shook his head and muttered, "She finally did it." Red and blue lights washed over the yard minutes later, turning the whole scene into something surreal. The officers listened for about 10 seconds, then asked who was down there. I pointed at the cellar door. They opened it, and Karen stormed up the steps, clipboard still in hand, launching straight into her speech about HOA rights and shared resources. One officer stopped her mid-rant and asked a simple question. "Why were you in his cellar?" She froze. That silence was louder than anything she'd screamed. The officer checked the property line, looked at the door, then looked back at her and explained she had zero permission to be there. HOA rules didn't apply. Private property did. They walked her to the cruiser to take a statement. Suddenly she wasn't loud anymore. No shouting. No clipboard waving. Just tight lips and angry breathing. After that day everything changed. The cellar stayed untouched. Karen stopped asking questions. Stopped walking near it. Stopped pretending underground space magically became HOA property if she said so. Neighbors treated me differently too, thanking me quietly for finally standing up to her. Karen avoided eye contact forever, like the ground might swallow her again if she pushed her luck. She went underground thinking she ran the place and came back up learning that real boundaries still exist, and they don't care about clipboards. Karen showed up the next afternoon like she was clocking in for a job she absolutely did not have. Pink blazer pressed, clipboard tucked under her arm, sunglasses perched like she was about to inspect a crime scene. She didn't knock. She didn't ask. She just stood near the cellar door tapping her pen against the clipboard, sighing dramatically so I'd notice. When I stepped outside, she smiled that tight HOA smile and said, "We need to talk about this space." She launched straight into it like she'd rehearsed. According to her, the HOA required inspection access to any structure that could be considered storage. I told her it was private property. She waved her hand like I'd said something adorable. "Community safety overrides personal use," she replied, flipping a page on her clipboard that I'm pretty sure was blank. She claimed the Cellar violated unspecified safety codes and could pose a risk to the neighborhood. The way she said neighborhood made it sound like a gated kingdom she personally ruled. I asked her which code it violated. She blinked, then said, "Multiple." Very convincing. She went on to explain that as a board member she had authority to enter, inspect, and document the Cellar. I laughed because it sounded insane. She didn't laugh back. "I'm serious," she said. "If you refuse access, that's non-compliance." Smash, like if this already smells like HOA nonsense, because even I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She stepped closer to the door, pen poised, already narrating notes out loud. "Unsecured access. Potential liability. Unauthorized private storage." I told her again, slower this time, that she was not allowed on my property and that the Cellar predated the HOA entirely. She rolled her eyes and said, "That doesn't matter anymore." That line hit me wrong. It wasn't ignorance. It was entitlement, pure and simple. Karen started talking about how the HOA could reclaim underutilized spaces for community benefit. She suggested residents might want to store decorations, tools, maybe even holiday stuff down there. I stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "It's not a shed," I said. "It's underground." She shrugged and said, "Unused is unused." The audacity was unreal. She claimed she'd already spoken to legal, and that refusal to cooperate could lead to fines. When I asked which lawyer, she ignored the question and kept writing on her clipboard. That's when I noticed there were no official forms. No letterhead. Just scribbles. She was literally inventing authority in real time. Neighbors walking by slowed down, sensing drama. Karen straightened her blazer, clearly enjoying the attention. I told her this conversation was over and to leave my property. She scoffed and said, "I have every right to be here." I corrected her. "No, you don't." She leaned toward the door and added, "You can't block HOA inspections." The confidence in her voice was wild, like saying it louder would make it true. She reached out and put her hand on the cellar door handle. I said, "Don't." She smirked and said, "Watch me." That was the moment everything shifted. This wasn't talk anymore. This wasn't posturing. She was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross. She jiggled the handle lightly at first, like testing boundaries. Then harder. The old door creaked, the sound echoing low and ominous. My stomach dropped. I told her one last time to stop. She ignored me, focused entirely on the door like it owed her access. Neighbors had stopped completely now, phones halfway out, eyes wide. Karen pulled again, harder this time, and said, "If you have nothing to hide, this won't be a problem." That sentence told me everything about how she thought. Privacy didn't exist to her. Ownership didn't matter. Only control. And she was about to prove it the dumbest way possible. She kept insisting the HOA handbook backed her up, even though she never produced a single page from it. Every claim she made sounded shakier than the last, but she said them with such confidence you could tell she was used to people folding. She talked about insurance, about hypothetical injuries, about how someone like her had to think ahead for everyone else. It was all smoke. No facts. No authority. Just vibes and volume. I told her she was making things up. She didn't deny it. She just said, "That's how governance works." That line would have been funny if it wasn't so unhinged. She paced back and forth, heels clicking, clipboard flapping, acting like she was doing me a favor. The whole time she kept glancing at the door, measuring it, eyeing it like a prize. The longer she talked, the clearer it became that she'd already decided she was going inside, permission or not. She didn't hesitate once the latch gave her that tiny bit of movement. Karen took it as permission from the universe. She muttered something about checking compliance, wedged her fingers under the edge of the door, and pried it open another inch. The old wood groaned like it was protesting on my behalf. I told her to stop, louder now, my voice carrying across the yard. She didn't even look back. She was already committed, already halfway through convincing herself she was doing the right thing. "This is for safety," she said, stepping onto the first cellar step. She said it like a slogan, like repeating it enough times would make it true. The smell of damp earth drifted up as the door opened wider. That cellar wasn't some clean little storage closet. It was dark, uneven, and clearly not meant for random inspections. I warned her again that she didn't have permission, that she needed to leave immediately. She waved me off and said, "If you have nothing to hide, this won't take long." That line made my jaw clench. Neighbors had fully stopped what they were doing by then. Phones were up. One guy across the way said, "This is nuts." Karen didn't care. She took another step down, then another, heels clacking awkwardly on the old wood. She kept narrating like she was filming her own reality show. "Low lighting," she said. "Potential hazard." She scribbled something on her clipboard even though she couldn't see a damn thing. I told her very clearly that she was trespassing and needed to come back up. She turned halfway down the stairs now and said, "You're interfering with an inspection." The confidence was wild. She actually believed that sentence meant something. I said, "This isn't an inspection. This is my property." She laughed, a short, sharp sound, and said, "You don't get to decide that." She kept going. One hand on the wall, the other gripping her clipboard like it would protect her. The cellar swallowed her up step by step. I could see her silhouette disappear into the dim light. She started poking around down there, muttering about storage violations and shared access. I warned her again. She refused again. "I'm almost done," she said. That was the moment I stopped arguing. I didn't touch her. I didn't follow her down. I didn't raise my voice anymore. I stepped forward, closed the door, and let it settle shut with that heavy, final sound. Not slammed. Just closed. I locked it and stepped back. From below there was a beat of silence, then instant chaos. "Etcha," she yelled. "Open this door right now." Her voice echoed up, panicked and angry. I pulled out my phone and called the police, keeping my voice calm. I told them exactly what happened. Someone entered my cellar without permission after being told not to. I closed the door for safety. No one was hurt. Dispatch told me to stay where I was. Karen's yelling ramped up. She started shouting about kidnapping, false imprisonment, HOA authority, the whole unhinged playlist. Neighbors whispered. Someone laughed nervously. Phones kept rolling. She rattled the door from below, yelling my name, yelling nonsense. I stayed back, hands visible, not engaging. The last thing I was going to do was escalate physically. This wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping a break-in without anyone getting hurt. Sirens cut through the noise a few minutes later, red and blue lights flashing across the yard like a movie scene. The officers arrived, listened for about 10 seconds, then asked who was in the cellar. I pointed. They approached the door, unlocked it, and opened it carefully. Karen stormed up the steps like a jack-in-the-box, clipboard still in hand, launching into her rant before she even cleared the doorway. "He locked me in HOA property," she shouted. One officer held up a hand and asked her a single question. "Why were you inside his cellar?" She froze. That pause was everything. The officer asked again. She tried to pivot, saying she was doing an inspection. He asked if she had permission. She didn't answer. He looked at the property line, the door, the witnesses, and nodded like it all made sense now. They separated us, took statements, and explained very plainly that she had no authority to enter private property. HOA rules didn't apply underground or anywhere else without consent. Karen's volume dropped fast. No more yelling. No more swagger. Just tight lips and angry breathing as they walked her toward the cruiser. Standing there watching it all play out, I knew I'd done the safest thing I could. That's when she planted her feet, grabbed the handle with both hands, and committed. She wasn't asking anymore. She was taking. And that was the exact second she stopped being an annoying HOA Karen and became a trespasser. She didn't even hesitate. The moment she decided the cellar belonged to her imaginary HOA universe, Karen stepped right past the posted signs like they were decorative. Bright, clear, impossible to miss signs that said private property and no trespassing, but she treated them like background noise. Her heels clicked against the stone path as she moved closer, clipboard tucked tight to her chest, chin lifted like she was marching into a meeting she chaired. I told her to stop. Loud. Clear. No confusion. She kept walking anyway. I repeated myself, firmer this time, telling her she was on private property and needed to leave immediately. She waved me off without even turning around. "I'm documenting," she said, like that word magically erased boundaries. She leaned toward the cellar door, squinting at the latch like she was solving a puzzle. The audacity was unreal. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was entitlement on autopilot. She reached out and touched the door like it was already hers. I said her name sharply and told her not to touch it. She glanced back over her shoulder, rolled her eyes, and said, "Relax." That one word flipped a switch. Relax is what people say when they're about to do something they know is wrong. She stepped closer, fully past the boundary line now, standing squarely on my property like she paid taxes there. I told her again to leave. She ignored me and started talking out loud, narrating fake notes to herself. Unsecured access point, she muttered. Potential liability. She tapped her clipboard for emphasis, like the sound itself granted authority. She tried the latch lightly at first, just a test, jiggling it like she was checking a hotel room. The old metal rattled. That sound carried. Neighbors heard it. Curtains moved. Doors opened. People slowed their walks. Phones appeared, half-raised, instinctively recording because everyone could tell something was about to go sideways. Karen didn't notice or didn't care. She was locked in. I told her one last time to stop. She laughed, an actual laugh, and said, "If you don't want people looking, don't keep secrets." That line told me everything about how her brain worked. She pulled the latch harder. The door creaked, that low warning sound echoing out of the ground. My stomach tightened. This wasn't an HOA dispute anymore. This was trespass in real time. She had crossed from annoying into reckless, and she didn't even flinch. A neighbor across the yard whispered, "Is she serious?" Another said, "She can't do that." Karen kept going. I stepped closer, careful not to touch her, and told her plainly that she was trespassing and needed to leave now. She spun around fast, clipboard up like a shield, and snapped, "You don't get to tell me where I can go." That was bold, considering where she was standing. She pointed at the door and said, "This is subject to inspection." She said it like she'd practiced in the mirror. She tried the latch again, harder this time, putting her weight into it. The door shifted slightly. Neighbors gasped. Someone's phone zoomed in. Karen smirked like she'd just won a round. "See," she said. "No big deal." I felt that calm before the storm feeling settle in. The kind where you stop arguing because you realize the person in front of you isn't listening anyway. She stepped fully onto the cellar steps, one foot down, testing stability, already planning her victory lap. "I'm going to need keys," she said casually, as if that was a normal sentence to say while breaking into someone's property. I told her to stop one last time. She ignored me again. That's when I realized this wasn't snooping. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't even power tripping. She was testing how far she could go without consequences. She assumed I'd back down like everyone else. She assumed volume and confidence would carry her through. Phones were fully up now. People weren't whispering anymore. They were watching. Karen didn't care. She tugged the latch once more and muttered, "Unbelievable," like she was the victim. Standing there watching her cross every line I'd clearly drawn, something clicked. This wasn't about the cellar. It was about control. She wanted to prove she could walk wherever she wanted, touch whatever she wanted, and nobody would stop her. That realization hit hard and clear. That's when I knew she wasn't just snooping. The moment the cellar door shut, the energy flipped from tense to unhinged. I didn't slam it, didn't shove anything, didn't do it out of anger. I closed it the same way you close a door when someone refuses to leave your house, steady and deliberate. The lock clicked into place, solid and final, and for half a second there was silence. Then Karen exploded from below like a fire alarm with opinions. She started screaming my name, screaming about authority, screaming about how this was false imprisonment, like she'd memorized the phrase from a bad TV show and was just waiting to use it. I stepped back immediately. No taunting. No arguing. No yelling down at her. I pulled out my phone and called the police right away because this was officially out of HOA nonsense territory and into real-world consequences. I told the dispatcher exactly what happened in plain English. Someone entered my cellar without permission after being told not to. I closed the door to secure my property and keep things safe. No one was hurt. No one was touched. She was yelling from below like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. Karen's voice echoed up from underground, bouncing off the wood and stone, making everything sound 10 times louder. "Open this door right now," she shrieked. "You can't do this." She started accusing me of kidnapping, detaining, violating her rights, all the buzzwords she thought sounded scary. None of it made sense. Neighbors gathered fast, stepping out onto lawns and porches, phones up, eyes wide. Somebody whispered, "She really went down there?" Another shook their head and said, "This is wild." Karen kept going. She yelled that she was afraid that I was threatening her, that the HOA would hear about this. She lied loud and fast, stacking one accusation on top of another, hoping something would stick. From the way she was pacing below, you could hear her heels scraping against the cellar floor, stomping like that would magically unlock the door. I stayed back with my hands visible, standing in plain sight, not engaging. I wasn't about to give her anything she could twist. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way and to remain calm. That was easy. Karen was the one spiraling. She started shouting up toward the opening, telling neighbors I'd trapped her. He locked me in, she screamed. A neighbor yelled back, "You went in his cellar." That shut her up for about 2 seconds before she doubled down and started crying about inspection authority and community rights. Comment, call the cops if you see where this is going, because at that point it was obvious she was digging herself deeper with every word. Someone else recorded the whole thing, narrating quietly for their camera. She broke in, they said. He called the police. Karen heard that and absolutely lost it. She started screaming that everyone was conspiring against her, that she was being targeted, that this was harassment. It was chaos, all coming from underground, like the cellar itself was rejecting her. I didn't say a word to her. Not one. I stood there, phone still in my hand, making sure the call stayed connected. The last thing I wanted was for her to claim I was taunting or threatening her. She kept lying anyway. She yelled that I'd pushed her inside, that I'd slammed the door on her, that I was holding her hostage. Every single thing was false, and the neighbors knew it. They'd seen her walk in. They'd heard me warn her. They'd watched me close the door and call the cops immediately. Sirens cut through the noise a few minutes later, and the entire yard lit up red and blue. The sound alone changed Karen's tone just a little, but not enough. She switched tactics, suddenly screaming for help, playing victim hard. The officers walked up, listened for maybe 10 seconds, and then asked who was down there. I pointed. They asked why. I explained again calmly. Trespass. Refused to leave. Secured property. Called police. When they opened the door, Karen came charging up like she'd been waiting for her big moment. Clipboard still in hand. Mouth already moving. She launched into a story that unraveled almost immediately. She claimed I'd forced her inside. Then said she was inspecting. Then said it was HOA property. The contradictions piled up fast. An officer stopped her mid-sentence and asked her to slow down. They separated us, took statements, and reviewed the footage neighbors were already offering. Karen kept insisting she had authority. The officers kept asking for proof. She had none. Her lies didn't help her at all, and everyone standing there could see it in real time. The police pulled up with lights flashing, red and blue washing over the yard like this was some late-night reality show instead of a quiet afternoon gone sideways. 2 officers stepped out, calm and professional, already clocking the crowd of neighbors, and the phones pointed their way. Karen was still yelling from below at that point, her voice echoing up from the cellar like she was trapped in her own bad decisions. One officer raised a hand and said, "All right, everyone take a breath." That didn't stop her, but it changed the tone. I stepped forward first, hands visible, keeping my voice steady. I explained everything from the beginning, slow and clean. Private property. Posted signs. Multiple verbal warnings. Her ignoring all of it. Her opening the door and going down anyway. I told them I closed the door for safety, not revenge, and called immediately. No touching. No threats. Just securing my property so nobody got hurt. The officers nodded, taking notes, glancing at the signs, the cellar door, and the neighbors who were clearly ready to back up every word. Then they opened the door and Karen came charging up the steps like she'd been waiting for her big courtroom moment. Clipboard clenched tight, voice already going full blast. He locked me in, she said. I was conducting an HOA inspection. She talked fast, stacking words like authority, compliance, and safety codes, hoping volume would turn nonsense into truth. She even pointed at the officers like they were supposed to side with her automatically. One officer let her run for a few seconds, then gently cut in. "Ma'am, we're going to ask some questions." Karen nodded like she was in charge of the interview. The officer asked if I had told her to leave. I said yes. 3 neighbors confirmed it immediately. Phone stayed up. Karen rolled her eyes and muttered about hostile residents. The officer wrote that down too. They asked Karen about her authority. She puffed up and said she was on the HOA board and had inspection rights. The officer asked for documentation. She waved the clipboard again. No forms. No letters. No approval. Just confidence and vibes. He nodded slowly, then asked why HOA rules would apply to a private cellar that predated the HOA itself. She stumbled, talking about community interest and shared resources. None of it landed. Then the officer asked the question that cut straight through everything. Calm voice. Simple words. Do you own this property? Karen froze. For a full second, she looked around like someone might jump in and rescue her. Nobody did. The yard went quiet. Even the neighbors stopped whispering. She swallowed and said, "No, but..." The officer raised a hand. "Just yes or no." Her shoulders dropped as she said, "No." That was it. You could practically hear the air leave her argument. The officer nodded like a puzzle piece had clicked into place. He explained slowly and clearly that HOA authority does not override property ownership. That entering without permission is trespass. That ignoring warnings makes it worse. That going underground without consent crosses into serious territory. Karen tried to interrupt, but he didn't let her. He laid it out in plain English, no yelling, no drama, just facts. Her tone shifted fast. The swagger drained out. She tried to pivot, saying she was just trying to help and ensure safety. The officer asked why she didn't call first. She had no answer. He asked why she didn't wait for written authorization. She shrugged. Every non-answer dug the hole deeper. Neighbors exchanged looks. Someone behind me whispered, "She's done." Another snorted like they'd been waiting years to see this. The officers separated us to take statements. They reviewed the footage neighbors offered without hesitation. Karen kept insisting she meant well. The evidence didn't care. Video showed her stepping past signs. Audio caught the warnings. Multiple angles showed her opening the door herself. The clipboard, once her security blanket, now just looked ridiculous hanging at her side. When they finished, one officer told her directly that she had no right to enter and that she'd crossed a legal line. He explained what could have gone wrong down there and why closing the door was the safest move. Karen didn't argue this time. She just nodded stiffly, jaw clenched, eyes darting anywhere but at the people watching. Standing there, listening to the officer spell it out, I felt the shift completely. The power was gone. The confidence was gone. The noise was gone. She'd walked in expecting control and walked out with none. All of it came down to that one question, the one she couldn't spin, dodge, or fake her way around. Her answer sealed it. The officer finished writing and clicked his pen closed with that final little snap that tells you something official just happened. He looked at Karen, then back at me and said it plainly so everyone could hear. No HOA authority. Private property. Trespassing. No wiggle room. No, but actually. Karen tried to interrupt, but he raised a hand and kept going, explaining that being on a board didn't give her a free pass to wander wherever she wanted. Especially not into a cellar. Especially after being told to leave. Especially with witnesses and video rolling. Karen's face went pale in stages, like her brain was buffering. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again with a softer tone. Suddenly she wasn't barking orders anymore. She was just trying to help. The officer didn't bite. He told her she was being cited for trespass and warned that if she ever entered my property again without permission, it wouldn't be a warning next time. Clipboard or not. Pink blazer or not. That thing she'd been using like a badge suddenly looked like a toy. Then came the part that really hit her. One officer stepped aside and made a call. He told the HOA exactly what happened, calm and factual. Private property. Unauthorized entry. Police involvement. Citation issued. When he hung up, he looked at Karen and told her the HOA had been informed that she acted alone and outside any authority. Translation: they were already backing away from her like she was radioactive. Karen tried to puff up again, but it didn't work. The swagger was gone. She muttered about misunderstandings and overreactions. One neighbor laughed, not even quietly. Another shook their head like they'd finally gotten confirmation of what they'd suspected for years. Phone stayed up. This wasn't just gossip anymore. This was consequences, live and uncut. The officers asked if I wanted to press anything further. I said I just wanted her off my property and for it not to happen again. They nodded, satisfied. One of them told Karen directly that any further contact about the cellar needed to go through proper legal channels. Not her clipboard. Not her opinions. Not her community standards. Real channels. The kind with paperwork and permission. Karen stood there for a second, looking around like the neighborhood might suddenly rally behind her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was brutal. That's when it hit her that this wasn't just a bad moment. This was a shift. The officer handed her the citation. She took it with shaking hands, eyes locked on the paper like it might explode. As the police wrapped up, people started talking. Quiet at first, then louder. Neighbors comparing stories. Someone mentioned another time Karen tried to inspect their shed. Someone else brought up the time she threatened fines over flower pots. It was like a dam broke. Years of side-eye and whispered complaints came spilling out all at once. Karen heard it. You could see it land. The officers left, but the fallout didn't. The HOA sent an email later that evening, carefully worded, distancing themselves from Karen's actions and reminding everyone about respecting property boundaries. No apology, but enough to make it clear she was on her own. By the next morning, Karen's name was quietly removed from the board listing. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. Seeing her authority evaporate in real time was wild. This woman had walked around for years like she ran the block. One bad decision later, she couldn't even make eye contact. She avoided my side of the street completely. When she did come outside, she kept her head down, clipboard nowhere in sight. The neighborhood vibe changed overnight. People started waving again, stopping to chat, joking about how quiet it suddenly felt. One neighbor thanked me for standing up to her. Another said they wished they'd done it sooner. I didn't feel triumphant so much as relieved. Like a pressure valve finally popped. Standing there that night, looking at the cellar door she'd obsessed over, I realized something. Karen didn't lose because I outplayed her. She lost because she believed her own hype. She thought authority was something you could just claim loud enough. Turns out, reality doesn't care. But the neighborhood reaction shocked me. The HOA apology email landed the next morning, right around 8:17 a.m., the time they usually sent out reminders about trash cans and lawn height. Same bland subject line, same stiff tone, but this one hit different. It said the association regretted a recent incident involving unauthorized actions by a board member, and reaffirmed its commitment to respecting private property. No names mentioned, but everyone knew exactly who it was about. You could practically hear Karen's authority evaporating between the lines. A few hours later, a second email followed, shorter and even colder. Karen was removed from all enforcement duties effective immediately. No inspections. No compliance checks. No community oversight. Just done. The wording was polite, but the message was loud. She was out. The woman who used to roam the neighborhood with a clipboard like she owned the place had officially been benched. By noon, the neighborhood vibe shifted in a way I hadn't felt in years. People I barely spoke to before started waving again. One neighbor caught me by the mailbox and said real quiet, "Thanks for standing your ground." Another nodded from across the street like we just survived the same storm. Nobody was throwing a party, but the relief was thick in the air. Karen stayed inside most of that day. When she finally came out to grab her mail, she didn't look up. No sunglasses. No clipboard. No pink blazer. Just stiff posture and fast steps. It was wild how fast the power drained once it was gone. All that confidence, all that noise, vanished the second it stopped working. I took the opportunity to secure the cellar for good. New lock. Reinforced hinges. Clear signage that spelled it out in plain English. Private property. No access without permission. Not dramatic, just solid and final. The cellar had always been part of the house, part of the history. Now it felt protected again like it should have been all along. Over the next few days, little things kept happening. Neighbors sharing stories about past run-ins with Karen. Laughing about how she used to measure fence gaps or lecture people about mulch. It wasn't mean-spirited, just cathartic. Like everyone finally felt safe enough to say it out loud. One guy joked that the street felt 10 degrees warmer without her shadow looming over it. The HOA stayed quiet after that. No surprise inspections. No passive-aggressive notices. Just routine stuff. It was amazing how normal things felt once one person stopped trying to control everything. I didn't feel like a hero or anything. Mostly I felt tired, but in a good way. The kind of tired you get after standing up for yourself and finally getting to sit down. A week later, I saw Karen at the grocery store. Same aisle, different universe. She glanced at me, then looked away like I was invisible. No comments. No muttering. No dramatic sighs. Just silence. For someone who thrived on confrontation, that silence said everything. That night, I stood by the cellar door for a second longer than usual. Thought about how something so small had turned into such a mess. How one person's need for control had blown up their own position. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice in a big dramatic sense. It was just boundaries being enforced, plain and simple. The neighborhood settled into a new rhythm after that. Quieter. Lighter. People smiled more. Kids played longer. Nobody worried about someone snooping where they didn't belong. Karen faded into the background, just another resident instead of the self-appointed sheriff. Looking back, the whole thing still feels unreal. One bad decision on her part and everything unraveled. She thought rules were weapons. Turns out they're limits. And once she crossed them, there was no spinning it. She tried breaking into my cellar like it was HOA storage, and ended up underground with the cops on the way.